Hello everyone, welcome to Lecture 4. As you know, I was a hand-painted 3D environment artist on the World of Warcraft team for 5 years, which means I spent 5 years sitting by my desk, making trees, flowers, plants, painting grass, dirt, sand, that kind of stuff. So today, let's talk about how to create foliage. So part 1, the principles of building foliage assets. We have probably talked about this type of stuff during lecture 1. We talked about gesture, energy, flow, and all that stuff. And for building foliage, we want to think in very similar ways, because every single tree or plant, it doesn't matter if it's a pine tree or succulent or some kind of willow, whatever type of tree it is or plant it is, they will always have a gesture very similar to humans. And that is because a tree will want to try to grow higher and higher and reach for more sun so that it will survive. And in some cases, it will try to radiate to all different directions, also try to have more leaves that will be getting the sun, right? And in some other cases, it might have like a draping shape, and similar to those two type of willow trees, they will kind of have this going downward gesture. And obviously there are many different type of trees. In some cases, they will be forming a plane on the very top, almost like an umbrella. And for this interesting tree right here, the middle part actually stores a lot of water, and that is why it's so huge. So depending on what kind of tree we make, we want to look at the reference photos, study the subject, and think about how to break it down into 3D cards and polygons. Here we have some examples by Servando Lupini, and we can see how each one of those trees are constructed. As you can see, every single tree has 3 different shots included in the sheet, and that is to show you an important idea. When you make a tree or a plant, it is very important to make sure that the asset looks good from all different angles. And that can be challenging because you have to rotate your asset round and round just to make sure there is no one particular angle that just looks really bad. When you see that angle, you have to move cards around for that particular shot to make it feel more natural. So here you can see some different angles, and obviously the tree trunk is a 3D model. It's made of polygons, and those cards are alpha cards. Depending on the complexity of those alpha cards, they can either be just like a 2D card or a trifold. So let's take a look. So for this one, you can probably imagine that this card is just like a card like that. So you have, some plants going this way and this way, and you kind of fold it a little bit, and then you bend the shape by adding a couple more edges to create something like this, right? And similar to those. So I can almost draw out the shapes that I see here. It's probably a card that looks like this, right? And this one is just one big card on the top, creating some interesting silhouette. And I'm going to use a different color, so I'm going to use yellow right here to show you the... Wait, I can't paint on it. Oh, it's too faint. Can I use a stronger color? Yeah, this part is the 3D geometry. I'm marking the 3D geometry with this purple color. You see what I mean? Like this branch. Oops, what's that? Is also a card. So For this tray, however, it's a little different. We will probably see the canopy, instead of being like a simple two-way fold, it is a trifold, something like this. So what happens is the artist will actually create a normal canopy texture like this, and they will kind of fold it, and then copy one of those planes to create the third fold. That way, you create a trifold, which give your canopy a more full look. So over here, I can see those are trifolds. Usually for bigger trays like this one, we want to use more trifolds to, occupy more space. Because we talked about overdraw in the other lecture, the 3D modeling lecture. When we have way too many canopy cards, it's not good. So we want to use a limited amount of canopy cards to create a full-looking tree. And a workaround for that is to use trifolds instead of two-way folds, okay? Do not stack two-way folds too many times. That will create an overdraw. And this trifold is way better. So here we can see, even for some kind of falling leaf and flower texture, Sarando is really focusing on the gesture of those. The gesture of each leaf, each flower is creating a unique sense of flow, and it's looking pretty cool, right? And for those ones over here, obviously those are just polygons, like full 3D mushrooms. And for those trees, they're half and half. The crystal parts are 3D geometries, and the tree canopy part is made of alpha cards. And for this kind of bush, usually we will want to stack multiple ones. A common way to build something like this would be having like one bush sheet and a couple like smaller piece for like additional gestures. We want to stack the big pieces for multiple times, making them as umbrella shapes so they can feel more full. Let me draw it again. Like we want to create a plane with this one mapped here, turning it into an umbrella and stack them for like 3 or 4 times while rotating and scaling them up and down to get the overall mass. And for those little pieces, they are just like tiny little pieces, kind of shoved on top and along the edge to create additional visual interest. That is how we build this kind of filler bush. This one is more straightforward. As you can see, it's just one stem that's 3D, and then we probably have, like a large leaf texture like this and a stem texture on the side. So you map this texture to the stem, and for those large leaf pieces, you just create large cards to like show them, this tree, or, well, it's not a tree, it's a shrub. It's very leafy, very lush, right? Something like that. So here we can see some more examples. Now let's again try to break them down a little bit. Here I see some trifolds, and the middle part has a little bit of umbrella shapes, right? You can see here, those are umbrellas, right? And those are like either two-way folds or trifolds. I'm not 100% sure. It can be either one. But it's basically umbrellas in the middle and a bunch of tries along the silhouette. And this thing right here is definitely a trifold. You're gonna have the texture like this, kind of mapped, and you draw the middle line and you turn it into something like this. so that players can run around this tree all they want, and there are always going to be at least 2 faces that are facing the players. This is a tree from the Theramar city, by the way, and the fruit is providing the Nightborn the magic vine they drink and obsessed with. And speaking of the fruit on the bottom, it can either be part of the trifold or 3D geometry. Either way. And this one, pretty obvious, you can see a bunch of trifolds, right? Like this is a very obvious trifold. I'm not going to draw it again, you see it? And here we have some two-way folds as well. And for the lily pad, or this one, it's pretty obvious. We just have like one big plant mapped on the texture, and then we have like a stem, right? So for ivy bushes, it's slightly more tricky. Usually for stuff like this, we will need to create a full sheet of ivies. You know, you want to have some larger ones, some like skinny ones, maybe one that's like more like a cube shape, and one that's like a long triangular shape. Basically, you want to have a variety of different shapes. So with this card, the artist can easily use those pieces as Lego pieces to construct interesting ivies. So the important thing to call out is, please do not copy and paste your leaves. You can't just select one leaf and, copy and paste to get like multiple leaves over those areas. That will look really derpy. If you look at this asset, every single piece of leaf is facing a different direction, and that is intentional. That is carefully designed to create painterly looking stylized art. We need to put our hearts and souls into the textures and try to really push the quality of those foliage assets. So here we have some more examples. Those bushes are created with multiple umbrella shapes and a couple pieces that's sticking up. And this one is also a trifold. And for this one, I think what happens is you'll have like let's actually draw this one out. I think for this one, you'll need 2 top pieces, something like those, and at least 2 because one will be too repetitive. And then we need another 2 velo pieces that will be dripping down. So basically you're gonna have like multiple like umbrella shapes on top, and then you use those 2 to create those like dripping bits. That's how you create this type of willow tree. Okay? Alright, let's keep going. So to create a 3D foliage asset in a stylized way, the most important thing is a silhouette. It is a key, okay? Look at those silhouettes. They're very organic, very flowy, as if the wind is blowing and you can see they're like subtly wiggling in the wind. That is the kind of result we want, okay? Like I said, we don't want to just select a leaf, copy and paste, and get some kind of very stiff result. That will look bad. So, with that being said, we do not have to worry too much about the details within the silhouette. Because if you think about those leaves, the thing is, over here, do you ever see any individual leaf pieces? Not really, right? Because in the environment, a leaf is nothing but a small piece in the background. It is much more important to create an overall impression of the environment than focusing on any small individual leaf pieces, which is why if you look at those, they're usually pretty simple, just a little bit of vein, a little bit of gradient, that's it. And here it's nothing but a gradient, right? It is not because Serwando is being lazy. Actually, Serwando is probably the best rendering artist I know. he can easily render a lot more details on those leaves, but he choose not to. And that is because if he did that, this will feel very busy, very noisy, okay? Let's keep going. Actually, I already talked about the third part. We don't want to make our asset look too noisy. To do that, we want to make sure the contrast is very low within the texture, meaning we do not want to have sharp highlights, dark AOs, any stuff like that. And that applies to both foliage and tile sets. I know we talked about popping your main focal point, half and half is bad, all that stuff. Here is the thing, guys. For foliage and tile sets, those rules, they do not really apply. For example, if you look at those leaves, they are about the same size, repeating over and over, right? Does that break the half and half rule? Not really, because they are not individual designs. Like, they're gonna be just working together in the background to serve as this type of backdrop visual noise. So it doesn't matter if we repeat those shapes a lot. And for the same reason, if we have like a very strong focal point on one of those leaves, it will also look bad because, imagine if you copy and paste that piece of leaf multiple times, that focal point will be duplicated. And it's gonna really hurt your image, okay? Also, we want to be aware of the density of the leaves. That is because when you have too many leaves overlapping each other, they will tend to look very busy and noisy. So again, think about the gesture. Like, think about how to create this elegant flow with a limited amount of alpha cards. Because when you have too many leaves, they can either be too busy or hurt your overdraw performance, or both. So what's the point, right? All right, let's jump into the second part. How to model 3D foliage assets. Here we have the modular approach, where we create, multiple canopy cards like those. This is actually production art I did for the Spirit Blossom Arena in TFT. And as you can see here, I kept the contrast extremely low so that from afar, they do not look too busy. And also, every single piece of those feel different because I do not want to have two pieces that are too similar, in which case it's a big waste of alpha, right? Alpha textures are very expensive, and if we're spending our budget to create a unique piece, it better feel unique in shape, right? And with that, we can also model out the tree trunk and kind of create multiple canopy cards to place on top and get different shapes using the same texture sheet. Okay, here we have some branches as well to make those dead trees or kind of half dry trees on the cliff. So basically, this is a modular approach. The most important thing to remember is you never want to create two pieces of leaves that are too similar in sizes. As you can see, I marked everything out using grain polygons. Every single piece I added has a different shape and they look unique, okay? And over here we have another example of the modular approach. As you can see here, like all those leaves are being created using, a sheet. This one is like multiple ball shape repeating. This one is just like a 3 big piece of leaves, maybe only 2. I created 3 reusing the textures. This flower is a trifold. Those grass are just little cards being copied over and over. And this flower right here, if you take a closer look, is actually made of 2 pieces. piece 1 is the flower stem with leaves and the flower bud. And the second part is actually the flower petals on a different card, like this. So when we have the petal kind of shoved into the flower and having the bud part coming out, we managed to create a very organic looking flower using a very small amount of polygons. Okay? And when it comes to modular approach, I think the best artist I know is Marie Lazar. Like, if you look at her stuff, you can see how organic those kelps look, although they're actually created using one texture sheet, which is pretty crazy if you think about it. Like, look at those organic shapes. They're so cool, right? And those ones too. So the important thing to think about when you are creating stuff like this is, again, the gesture and the color harmony, and also think about the sizes. Like, imagine if we create a scene using, a number of different plants. What if we have, the rock over here, and we have this one being the same size? But those small ones, they're almost the same size as the big ones. They're all like pretty large. The scene will look very, very busy that way, right? And the reason why this feels nice is because there's a very clearly established hierarchy. You have the large ones, you have the medium ones, you have the small ones, and you have the tiny ones as well. And when you have those plants in different shapes and sizes all working together in the scene, they start to feel really, really nice. You can see those large ones versus some small ones versus, some medium-sized ones. Yeah, it can look really cool. And here we have some more examples. You can see how interesting the gestures are, and when you place those in the scene, like how they're contributing to the overall impression of this environment, of the space, right? So definitely go check out her Artstation. She has some really cool stuff. And here is a list of environment art to-dos and not to-dos created by Marie that I want to share with you guys. So the first one, like I mentioned, we want to focus on the silhouette. We do not want to have things that are too empty. We want to have like a good amount. Usually the middle part can be a little more full, and along the edges we can have some more interesting shapes, right? And when we create a tree like this, like a 3D tree, we don't want to have the bottom part to be like that, because it's going to be very difficult to put it in a cliff. So it's much better to have this shape, so it can just easily be placed into the cliff without, creating like a weird bug right here. Making sure that your normals are always facing upward so that the rendering does not, become weird. Because when you have normals facing other directions, sometimes it can appear to be very dark and stuff. So use your texture space wisely. Simply having this piece is not enough. You wasted a lot of the space over here, and it's much better if you have, some additional pieces to fill it up. So for trees like this, you want to make sure that the plants will have, different silhouettes in different camera angles. If they're too similar, you probably didn't do a good job, because those plants will be used by level designers to create a whole zone. Imagine you only have 3 different variants of those trees, and you need to create a whole forest with them. The best way to do that would be to, making sure every single angle of those trees look different, so that when you rotate them, scale them, mix and match them in different parts of the forest, putting them into clumps, they appear to be unique looking traits without looking too similar. So over here, we do not want too many little pieces clipping underneath the ground, because whenever you have one of those, it's kind of a clip, So keep those footprints small, and that way they will feel more natural. And the reason why a trifold is better than a quadfold is because when they're intersecting into each other as 90-degree cards, you will see that cross shape from certain angles feels weird, and this is better and still more performant. And also, really think about big, medium, small shapes, like I mentioned. Okay? So those are all things to think about when you are making plans. And in addition to the modular approach, where the WoW team is very good at, we also have the unique approach. So in this approach, we kind of unwrap everything uniquely and treat the entire map as a 3D canvas to paint cool images on top. And here you can see that every single piece is uniquely unwrapped, and you can find two things that are similar looking. And that is because nothing in this composition is modular. Everything is unique, and the benefit for that is you can get a lot of unique shape flows and gestures, but it will be a lot more expensive. So for Summoner's Rift, which is just one map, the team can afford to do something like this. By the way, it still took them 2 years. And imagine if the WoW team, when they decide to uniquely unwrap everything, well, good luck with that. The next expansion will take them at least 10 years. It will look really cool though. So here we have another example. It's like a study I did. The tree trunk is uniquely unwrapped to create a lot of interesting gestures, but those leaves are actually still modular. Here you can see this is a texture sheet I used for those trees. So part 3 is how do we paint textures for, those foliage assets? Well, there are 4 things to think about. The first one, like we mentioned, super important, is the elegant silhouette. You want to make sure that every single plant shape on your sheet has a very cool gesture, and that way, when you place them together, they can form even better, even more interesting gestures. Okay, if a certain shape feels too stiff, you might want to fix that. And focus on the shape flow, and focus on subtle focal points instead of main focal points. As you can see, I sneaked in a tiny bit of highlights, a little bit of brown parts, and a little bit of, dry pieces here and there, without ever going too deep into the rendering. This is as far as I will go for rendering a highlight, in which case it still feels very subtle, but if you want to actually make this part pop, you can go a lot crazier than that. And this one is even softer. You can barely see any highlights or any shadows, but you can still see that every piece has an interesting gesture, and that is intentional. And this one too, this one is for Spirit Blossom. And last but not least, we also want to make sure it's very low contrast. Okay, so to make sure things are low contrast, meaning we do not want to have a very strong shadow or a very bright highlight. And only by clamping down the values, I know we talked about clamping down the values for, stylized art in general. If you want to make your stylized art look better, you kind of want to clamp your value to 80 to 20 without tapping into the dark is dark and the white is white. But for foliage assets, I would say we should clamp it down even more. So it should be somewhere between, say, 20 to 40 or 40 to 60 or 60 to 80. Like it should be really, really clamped. Okay. So here we have some more examples by Kelly. Kelly is another super, super good 3D environment artist I worked with. If you look at this tree right here, like this entire swamp tree was textured using a handful of textures. Can you believe that? This entire thing is being textured using this one canopy sheet and 5 different trunk textures. Pretty crazy, right? Like all those top parts are being textured with this. The drippy parts are textured with this. And all the tree trunk pieces, they're either covered by full moss or half moss or dry moss or bare tree bark. She blended those 5 different textures to create something like this, which is pretty crazy. Over here, let's appreciate more Kelly's work. Look how pretty the color palette is. I almost want to move there and leave there. And look at how soft everything feels. We're going to talk about her work again in the tileable texture part. But for now, let's just appreciate how cool those textures feel. And can you see how soft and clamped they are? As you already guessed, a lot of the rules we have to follow for 3D foliage would also apply to those tileable textures as well. We also want to clamp our values. We also do not want any focal point to stand out too much. And we also want to focus on the overall flow and elegant silhouette. Okay? So let's look at some more Serrano Lupini examples. Here we can see this really cool tree with some really awesome looking trunk texture rendering. Here we have this very nice rock, some pillowy grass. And when they come together, they can form a whole forest. And here's the thing. Okay, the WoW engine was developed in the 90s. It is nowhere nearly as powerful as Unreal. And yet, we can still achieve something like this. Imagine if we actually have Unreal 5 lighting and stuff, with those really unique silhouettes and unique designs, this thing can look a lot better, okay? The fact that we're using 90s tech to get something this cool is actually pretty insane. Here you can see some tree trunk textures. Just look how soft and interesting those renderings are, and how much sense of flow and gesture Sawano managed to sneak into those renderings while adding in, all those details. Pretty crazy. And when you apply them to the tree, they look great, right? And obviously for a large tree like that, sometimes we'll see trifolds. That's kind of inevitable. From certain angles, you will see those trifolds, but it is what it is. Overall, the tree still looks good, and that's what matters, right? Okay, so this is all I want to talk about for foliage.